After decades of silence, Michelle Pfeiffer is finally speaking out about one of Hollywood's greatest enigmas, her mysterious connection with the legendary Robert Redford. It's a story that begins not in scandal, but in silence, the kind of silence that only two stars of their magnitude could hold for so long. For years, fans wondered, what really happened between Pfeiffer and Redford during the making of Up Close and Personal? Was their connection purely cinematic? Or did something deeper flicker beneath the surface? Admiration, tension, or unspoken emotion? As the years passed, their film became more than a 1990s romantic drama. It turned into a snapshot of a moment when two generations of Hollywood icons collided. The youthful grace of Michelle Pfeiffer and the seasoned charisma of Robert Redford. Even today, people still remember where they looked at each other on screen. That soft, almost electric tension that made audiences believe every frame. Behind the lens, though, there were whispers, rewrites, late-night rehearsals, creative clashes that only two perfectionists could understand. And yet, through it all, what emerged was a bond that seemed both professional and deeply personal. Decades later, when Michelle Pfeiffer, now 67, shared a throwback photo of herself perched on Robert Redford's shoulders in the ocean, smiling carefree, radiating warmth, fans lost their minds. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a rare glimpse into a truth she'd guarded for years. The caption was simple, even playful, but the emotions it stirred were profound. After all this time, had Michelle finally decided to tell the world what that experience really meant to her? Was this her way of honoring Redford, or revealing something we all sensed but never heard confirmed? This isn't just another Hollywood pairing. It's a story of two stars whose lives, though shaped by fame and decades apart in age, intersected in a way neither could have predicted. It's about respect, chemistry, mentorship, and the quiet truths that linger long after the cameras stop rolling. To understand what Michelle Pfeiffer has finally revealed, and why now, we need to go back in time to the moment when their worlds first collided. Michelle Pfeiffer was born on April 29, 1958, in Santa Ana, California, a small-town girl who would one day become one of Hollywood's most luminous stars. Her beginnings were humble. She worked briefly as a cashier and court stenographer before deciding to pursue acting, a decision that led her into the unpredictable world of television and low-budget films in the late 1970s. At first, it was a grind, bit parts, soap opera roles, and auditions that led nowhere. But Pfeiffer had something that couldn't be ignored, a quiet intensity, a blend of vulnerability and fire that would soon make her unforgettable. Her early career took off with Grease 2 in 1982, though the film itself faltered. Yet, even in that misstep, the industry took notice. Her charisma on screen was undeniable. Then came the turning point, Scarface, 1983. As Elvira Hancock, she wasn't just a glamorous mob wife. She was magnetic, mysterious, a woman who could hold her own opposite Al Pacino. The film became iconic, and so did she. Over the next decade, Pfeiffer proved she wasn't a one-note beauty. She immersed herself in complex roles. The sultry Susie Diamond in The Fabulous Baker Boys, 1989, the manipulative Marquise de Mertert in Dangerous Liaisons, 1988, and the conflicted Catwoman in Batman Returns, 1992. Critics praise her emotional range and natural elegance, calling her one of the finest actresses of her generation. Awards followed. Golden Globe wins, BAFTA recognition, and multiple Oscar nominations. But Pfeiffer's power went beyond trophies. She carried an aura of mystery, rarely giving interviews, keeping her personal life shielded from Hollywood's glare. In a world obsessed with exposure, she was an enigma. When she wasn't on screen, she was devoted to her family and her craft, quietly building a legacy on her own terms. Robert Redford's path, though starting decades earlier, mirrored that same spirit of independence. Born on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, California, Redford grew up far from the bright lights, the son of a milkman who found solace in art and sports. After studying painting in Europe and at the University of Colorado, he stumbled into acting almost by accident. What followed was a meteoric rise that defined an era. In the 1960s and 70s, Redford wasn't just a movie star. He was a movie star. His performances in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, The Sting, 1973, All the President's Men 1976, The Natural 1984, and Out of Africa 1985 create a legacy of intelligence, restraint, and quiet heroism. But Redford's ambitions went far beyond acting. By the 1980s, he was reshaping the film industry itself. As a director, his debut film Ordinary People 1980 won him an Academy Award for Best Director, proof that his artistry wasn't limited to being in front of the camera. More importantly, he founded the Sundance Institute and the Sundance Film Festival, creating a platform that championed independent filmmakers around the world. To many, Robert Redford wasn't just a star. He was a visionary, a man who used fame to open doors for others. What made the eventual meeting between Pfeiffer and Redford so fascinating was how different, and yet similar, their public images were. Pfeiffer, private, selective, and quietly intense. Redford, outspoken, socially conscious, and deeply engaged with the film industry's evolution. She avoided the Hollywood spotlight when she could. He used it to build something lasting. She was still in the midst of her prime when they met. He was a living legend, admired not just for his films, but for his integrity and activism. And yet, both shared something crucial, a refusal to be defined by fame. They approached their craft with authenticity, always chasing truth over celebrity. So when the two finally came together for Up Close and Personal, it wasn't just a casting decision. It was a symbolic meeting of two artistic worlds. A woman who valued depth over exposure, and a man who turned fame into purpose. Their paths, so different yet parallel in spirit, were destined to collide. And when they did, Hollywood would never forget it. When Up Close and Personal hit theaters in 1996, it wasn't just another romantic drama. It was a Hollywood event. Directed by John Avnet and written by celebrated screenwriters Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn, the film had been years in development. Originally conceived as a biographical drama inspired by the tragic life of news anchor Jessica Savage, the story underwent a dramatic transformation before reaching the screen. What began as a gritty, journalistic character study evolved into a sweeping love story about ambition, mentorship, and sacrifice in the high-pressure world of television news. The result was a glossy, emotionally charged film that bore little resemblance to Savage's real life, but it carried all the hallmarks of classic Hollywood storytelling. Robert Redford was cast as Warren Justice, a veteran news director with a calm authority and quiet strength, a role that seemed tailor-made for him. Michelle Pfeiffer stepped into the role of Talia Atwater, a young, ambitious woman determined to rise from local weather girl to national anchor. Their characters' journey, from teacher and student to lovers, reflected not just the dynamics of newsroom, but the universal tension between love and ambition, between nurturing and independence. Even before cameras rolled, industry insiders buzzed with excitement. This was Redford, the screen legend about Africa in the Sting, paired with Pfeiffer, the reigning queen of 1990s Hollywood elegance. When production began, the press called the collaboration one of the most anticipated pairings of the decade. The difference in their ages, nearly 22 years, only added intrigue. Could a story about a seasoned newsman and an up-and-coming journalist work without falling into cliché? The answer came quickly. Yes. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, it became the stuff of legend. During early screenings, one critic famously described their connection as a 14 on a scale of 1 to 10, a phrase that spread through entertainment columns like wildfire. Behind the camera, however, the atmosphere wasn't always as smooth as it looked. Pfeiffer was known for her precision. She approached every role with emotional honesty, and she wanted the story to ring true. Redford, meanwhile, was not just an actor but a creative force, offering thoughts on dialogue and character motivation. The script underwent multiple rewrites, partly to soften its darker journalistic roots and lean more toward romance. Pfeiffer's personal commitments also played a role in the film's logistics. Having recently become a mother, she reportedly asked the production to shorten certain location schedules so she could return home sooner. Director John Avnet and Redford, ever professionals, adjusted without complaint. The respect between the two leads was mutual, though it occasionally sparked creative tension, the kind that often fuels great performances. Despite the controlled set environment, genuine warmth developed between the stars. Years later, Pfeiffer posted a throwback photo from the film, a joyful image of her perched on Redford's shoulders in the sea. Captioned playfully as #TBD frolicking with Mr. Redford, the picture instantly went viral. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was proof of the easy affection and trust that had existed between them. Fans who remembered the film saw it as confirmation of something they had long sensed. Their connection was real, even if it never crossed professional lines. The film itself told a story that mirrored their dynamic in subtle ways. Tally Atwater begins as a determined but inexperienced reporter desperate to prove herself. Warren Justice, her mentor, recognizes her raw talent and pushes her toward greatness, sometimes gently, sometimes fiercely. Their relationship evolved from mentorship into something deeper, a complicated love built on mutual respect and shared ambition. But as Tally's career ascends, Warren's begins to fade. The roles shift. She becomes a star, he the one left behind. It's a poignant reflection on power, growth, and the painful cost of success. When Up Close and Personal premiered, audiences were drawn in by the emotional weight of its story and the magnetic pairing of its leads. Critics were divided. Many reviewers pointed out how far the film had strayed from its original source material. Jessica Savage's real life had been dark and tragic, filled with personal struggles that the final movie all but erased. Instead, the film delivered a polished romantic narrative that some called too glossy for its subject. Yet, even the harshest critics couldn't deny one thing. The chemistry between Redford and Pfeiffer was spellbinding. While the New York Times dismissed the script as sentimental, other outlets noted that Pfeiffer brought a fierce authenticity to Tally, grounding what could have been a lightweight role. Redford, steady and understated, played Warren with a world-weariness that balanced her youthful intensity. Audiences, too, responded differently from the critics. CinemaScore surveys gave the film an and it grossed over $100 million worldwide, a strong showing for a romantic drama in the mid-90s. The soundtrack also became iconic. Celine Dion's Because You Love Me, written for the film, soared to #1 on the charts and earned an Academy Award nomination. The song's sweeping emotion captured the heart of the movie, a love built not on glamour, but on gratitude and mutual belief. Looking back, Up Close and Personal stands as a fascinating intersection of two careers. For Redford, it was one of his last great romantic leads before transitioning fully into directing and producing. For Pfeiffer, it was another reminder of her power to elevate material with nuance and depth. What audiences saw on screen, the mentor guiding the student, the seasoned soul touched by youthful ambition, was mirrored in reality. A living legend inspiring a performer at the height of her powers. Their worlds, separated by decades of stardom, collided under the hot lights of a 1990 studio set. And from that collision came not just a film, but a story that still resonates. A story about ambition, tenderness, and quiet admiration between two of Hollywood's finest. When Up Close and Personal hit theaters in 1996, the reactions were as divided as the two stars who led it. Critics called it overly sentimental, even formulaic, a film that wastes its superstar leads, as one reviewer bluntly put it. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a low score, pointing to its softened portrayal of the original, much darker true story of journalist Jessica Savage. Yet, the audiences told another story. CinemaScore graded it an and theaters filled with fans who couldn't take their eyes off Michelle Pfeiffer and Robert Redford together. It wasn't just about journalism or ambition. It was about the spark between two people who seemed to understand each other beyond the script. Media coverage at the time echoed that fascination. Articles described their chemistry as the film's real heartbeat, stronger than its narrative. One feature summed it up. Whatever the flaws of Up Close and Personal, Pfeiffer and Redford make the camera believe. And that's exactly what puzzled everyone, because behind the scenes, not everything was effortless. There were quiet tensions and whispered disagreements, not a scandal, but of artistic precision. The film paired two performers from entirely different eras. Redford, at 60, was already a Hollywood monument, an actor, director, producer, and founder of the Sundance Institute. Pfeiffer, nearly 22 years younger, had carved her own path through the 1980s and early 1990s with Scarface, The Fabulous Baker Boys, and Dangerous Liaisons. She wasn't just a glamorous star. She was an actress with formidable instincts and control over her career. That difference in generation, stature, and experience mirrored the very dynamic of their characters. War and Justice, the seasoned newsman, and Tally Atwater, the ambitious protege determined not to be defined by anyone. According to production notes and later interviews, both actors were heavily involved in shaping their roles. Script revisions were constant. Faxes of rewritten dialogue flew back and forth between Redford, Pfeiffer, and the writers Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn. Each brought strong opinions about how to portray mentorship, vulnerability, and love without losing integrity. It wasn't always smooth. Pfeiffer reportedly asked to shorten locations shooting in Florida to balance her family life. A reminder that, unlike her character, she refused to sacrifice everything for work. Redford, known for his perfectionism, wanted authenticity above all else. Their creative approaches sometimes clashed, but out of those tensions came authenticity, the kind audiences felt in every shared glance. The age and power dynamics on screen carried real emotional weight. Pfeiffer's Tally begins the story idolizing War and Justice, but gradually grows beyond him, finding her own voice. The film's emotional pivot, when she finally steps into her own spotlight, mirrors a kind of passing of the torch between the two actors. Redford's presence gave Pfeiffer's performance grounding. Her energy reignited his quiet intensity. Critics who missed the subtext of their interplay may have underestimated how much their real selves infused the story. But beneath all that cinematic glamour, both actors were carrying private burdens that rarely made it into interviews. Redford's life, though outwardly calm, was marked by profound loss. He had 4 children with his first wife, Lola Van Wagenen, whom he married in 1958. Their first son, Scott, died from sudden infant death syndrome at just 2.5 months old. Years later, their second son, James, passed away in 2020 after a long battle with liver cancer. Redford rarely spoke about these losses publicly, but those who knew him said they gave a quiet depth to his performances, a sadness behind the smile. By the time he worked with Pfeiffer, he had already spent decades balancing fame with environmental activism, directing, and mentoring new filmmakers through Sundance. Pfeiffer, meanwhile, was in a transformative phase of her own. In the early 1990s, she met television writer and producer David E. Kelley. Before they married, she adopted a daughter, Claudia, and soon after had a son, John. By the time Up Close and Personal was filmed, she was balancing the height of her career with motherhood, a contrast to the single-minded ambition of her character. In interviews years later, she admitted that her priorities had shifted. Fame no longer defined her sense of worth. Perhaps that's what connected them most, a shared understanding that success doesn't erase pain or pressure. On set, Redford's quiet mentorship blended with Pfeiffer's focus, and something unspoken passed between them. There were no public displays, no gossip column scandals. Just 2 people who, for a brief time, reflected pieces of each other through the lens of fiction. The chemistry that the public adored wasn't manufactured. It was born from empathy, from unspoken experiences of loss, love, and survival. What viewers saw on screen, the mentor who fears obsolescence and the protege who outgrows him, may have mirrored a deeper truth neither of them needed to say aloud. Years later, when Pfeiffer posted that photo of herself on Redford's shoulders, smiling and radiant, fans saw nostalgia. But perhaps it was more than that, a quiet tribute to someone who had taught her, challenged her, and, in his own way, understood her better than most ever did. Now, at 67, Michelle Pfeiffer has broken her silence. Not through a tell-all interview or a press conference, but with something far quieter and infinitely more powerful, a single photo. On her Instagram feed, she posted a throwback image that immediately sent fans into a frenzy, a candid moment from the set of Up Close and Personal. In it, Pfeiffer sits atop Robert Redford's shoulders in the ocean, both laughing, sunlit, free from the seriousness of the newsroom drama they portrayed on screen. She captioned it simply, #TBD frolicking with Mr. Redford. Just 6 words, but they hit like a revelation. For nearly 3 decades, she had never publicly reflected on what working with Redford truly meant to her. The photo, though playful, carried the weight of memory, a return to a moment frozen in time, long before the world had begun asking whether their chemistry was real or rehearsed. Fans and journalists immediately began dissecting the post. Why now? Why this photo? and why Mr. Redford said with such affectionate formality. To many, it felt like Michelle was finally acknowledging the truth behind their collaboration, that what audiences saw between them wasn't just cinematic illusion, but the product of genuine admiration, perhaps even a deep emotional connection that transcended acting. What makes this moment so remarkable is how rare it is for Pfeiffer to look back publicly. Known for her privacy and humility, she has long resisted the Hollywood habit of revisiting the past for attention. Her post wasn't promotional. Up Close and Personal hadn't been trending, and Redford himself had quietly retired from acting. That's what made it feel sincere. It wasn't nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It was reflection. At 67, with her legacy secure, Pfeiffer seemed to be allowing herself to speak with tenderness about a man who had shaped one of her most memorable performances. Her fans reacted instantly. Within hours, the photo flooded social media platforms and entertainment outlets. Comments poured in. People recalling the film, the unforgettable chemistry, and how the image brought back an entire era. Some fans speculated that Pfeiffer was revealing more than just a fond memory, that the warmth in her caption hinted at unspoken affection, or at least a recognition of how meaningful that connection had been. Headlines followed suit. Michelle Pfeiffer finally speaks her truth about Robert Redford. After 29 years, she opens up, and the photo that says it all. Media outlets such as Hello, and people picked up on the emotional undercurrent of her words. They noted that her tone was affectionate but reserved, a balance that mirrored her long-standing reputation for grace and privacy. On platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok, fans began sharing old clips of Redford and Pfeiffer doing interviews in 1996, marveling at how comfortable and warm they seemed with each other. In one resurfaced YouTube clip, Pfeiffer, seated beside Redford during a promotional interview for Up Close and Personal, laughs when he describes her as a natural, completely unpretentious, with instincts you can't teach. She returns a compliment softly, saying, "He made it easy. He made everything feel real." At the time, those words were treated as promotional politeness. But now, in light of her recent post, fans saw them differently, as a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect that might have gone deeper than either was willing to say aloud. The reaction wasn't just about curiosity. It was about emotion. Viewers who had grown up with the film described how the image felt like coming home, a reminder when cinema prioritized human connection over spectacle. For many, Michelle's post represented something pure. Two actors who had shared something meaningful, preserved it without exploitation, and let time give it its true value. Yet, for all the buzz, there's also what Michelle didn't say, and that silence is telling. She didn't elaborate on what the photo meant. She didn't describe her relationship with Redford beyond the professional. There were no hashtags about love or memories. Just that one phrase, frolicking with Mr. Redford. In an industry obsessed with oversharing, Pfeiffer's restraint spoke volumes. It reminded everyone that not every truth must be spelled out to be understood. There is no confirmed evidence that Pfeiffer and Redford ever had a romance beyond the screen. In fact, both were in different personal phases of life during the making of Up Close and Personal. Redford was in his late 50s, divorced but deeply focused on his work and his children. Pfeiffer was building a family with David E. Kelly, who would become her husband and creative anchor. Their professional relationship was built on mutual respect, and perhaps that is what made their connection so convincing. The rare chemistry of two actors who didn't need to blur lines to create magic. Still, silence can be powerful. By choosing to revisit that memory at this moment in her life, Pfeiffer has, in her own way, redefined what revelation means. It isn't about confession or gossip. It's about acknowledging emotional truth. Her post, brief but evocative, told the world what words never had to, that their collaboration mattered deeply to her, that Redford left a mark not just on her career, but on her spirit. As the photo continues to circulate, one thing is clear. Even without speaking, Michelle Pfeiffer said everything. In an age of noise, she reminded us that some connections, some truths, don't fade. They simply wait quietly until the right moment to resurface, like sunlight reflecting off the ocean where two Hollywood legends once laughed, unaware that decades later, the world would still be captivated by that fleeting perfect moment. Nearly 3 decades after its release, Up Close and Personal continues to occupy a unique place in Hollywood history, not as one of Robert Redford's or Michelle Pfeiffer's greatest critical triumphs, but as one of their most emotionally resonant collaborations. The film, for all its flaws, endures as a touchstone for both stars. Critics may have dismissed it for being too polished, too softened from its original inspiration, the life and tragic death of journalist Jessica Savage. But audiences connected deeply with the emotion it carried. The movie's legacy has little to do with the newsroom politics or the uneven pacing that reviewers pointed out. Instead, it survives because of what existed between its two leads. Chemistry that can't be written, only felt. When people remember Up Close and Personal, they don't recall headlines or critiques. They remember them. The quiet glances. The way Talia Atwater's voice falters when War and Justice tells her, "You've got what it takes." That fleeting kiss that felt more like a promise than passion. And of course, the haunting melody that followed audiences out of theater. Celine Dion's Because You Loved Me. The song, written by Diane Warren, became a global hit and was nominated for both an Academy Award and a Golden Globe. It didn't just accompany the movie, it defined it. Decades later, when fans hear that opening piano line, they think not of the film's newsroom setting, but of Pfeiffer and Redford on screen, framed in soft light, embodying a kind of timeless, bittersweet connection that Hollywood rarely produces anymore. But beyond nostalgia, Up Close and Personal also revealed something profound about how Hollywood portrays and processes power and mentorship. The story itself was a classic Hollywood structure. The young woman mentored by an older, powerful man, their professional relationship evolving into romance. It's a trope that's been retold countless times, from The Way We Were to Star is Born. Yet, with Pfeiffer and Redford, something was different. The film wasn't about domination or submission. It was about transformation. Talia Atwater's journey wasn't defined by Redford's War and Justice. It was propelled by it. Her success didn't come because he loved her, but because she learned to stand beside him and, eventually, beyond him. That dynamic mirrors a larger truth about Hollywood's mentorships, particularly for women. It raises a question Pfeiffer herself has often been asked. How does a woman hold her ground when working opposite a man whose name is already legend? Pfeiffer, throughout her career, has quietly resisted being framed as the protege. She worked with icons, Al Pacino, Jack Nicholson, Sean Connery, and yet always maintained her own gravity. Her experience with Redford was no exception. If anything, it reinforced her reputation as a performer capable of commanding presence beside anyone. The industry has long blurred the lines between on-screen emotion and off-screen reality. For decades, fans and tabloids alike have romanticized partnerships that thrive in fiction, as though truth required confirmation to feel authentic. But what Pfeiffer's recent reflection on Redford shows is that the deepest connections in Hollywood aren't always romantic. Sometimes they're rooted in shared creative respect, in what two artists teach each other without ever needing to say it aloud. And that brings us to the deeper meaning of Pfeiffer's revelation. Her Instagram post, that simple hashtag TBD frolicking with Mr. Redford, isn't just nostalgia, it's reclamation. It's her way of reframing the story on her own terms. For years, Up Close and Personal belonged to the studios, the critics, and the audience's projections. Now, with one post, Pfeiffer pulled it back into something personal. She reminded the world that behind every film, especially one built on intimacy, there are human stories, moments of warmth, laughter, trust, that endure long after the final cut. For Robert Redford, who retired from acting in 2019 after a storied 6-decade career, Pfeiffer's reflection added an unexpected epilogue to his legacy. It paints him not just as a Hollywood legend, but as a man who inspired genuine affection and respect from those who worked closest to him. Through her eyes, we see him anew, not just a Sundance founder, not just the actor from The Sting or All the President's Men, but the quiet collaborator who could make even the most poised of co-stars feel seen, safe, and challenged all at once. As audiences revisit Up Close and Personal today, they do so with new understanding. It's no longer just a 1990s romantic drama. It's a time capsule of two artists meeting at a rare point in their careers, one looking back, one looking forward, and finding something enduring in the middle. The revelation doesn't change the film, it deepens it. And perhaps that's the real power of Michelle Pfeiffer's gesture at 67. Not to expose secrets, but to remind us that truth in Hollywood isn't always about scandal. Sometimes it's about gratitude. Sometimes it's about memory. And sometimes, as in the case of her and Robert Redford, it's about two people who met, made something beautiful, and quietly carried its meaning for a lifetime, until one day, one of them decided to share a glimpse of it with the world once more. The truth doesn't always lie in dramatic confessions. Sometimes it's in a single gesture, a throwback photograph, or a long, silent voice finally heard. When Michelle Pfeiffer, now 67, shared that nostalgic beach photo with Robert Redford, she didn't just post a memory. She opened a window into a moment that had lived quietly in Hollywood history for nearly 30 years. No tabloids, no gossip, no words, just two people captured in a scene of effortless joy, the kind that only real connection can create. To truly understand the meaning behind that image, you have to see the whole journey. Michelle Pfeiffer, born in Santa Ana, California, in 1958, rose from small television roles to become one of the most respected and versatile actresses of her generation. From Scarface and the Fabulous Baker Boys to Dangerous Liaisons and Batman Returns, she proved again and again that her power lay not only in beauty, but in depth, grace, and intelligence. Robert Redford, born decades earlier in Santa Monica, had already conquered Hollywood long before their paths crossed. With Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, and All the President's Men, he became both a screen legend and a visionary who transformed independent cinema through the Sundance Institute. Their worlds met in 1996 as Up Close and Personal, a story about mentorship, ambition, and love that mirrored the truth of their professional relationship. Two artists at different points in their lives, finding common ground through respect and creative energy. The film's emotional center wasn't in its dialogue, but in the quiet way they looked at each other, a mutual understanding that transcended age, fame, and fiction. And now, decades later, Pfeiffer's gentle nod to Redford, that smiling moment on the ocean waves, feels like the closing of a circle. It's a reminder that not all Hollywood truths come wrapped in scandal. Some are told in silence, in the way one star honors another, without needing to explain why. So maybe that's the real revelation. Not that there was ever a secret affair, but that admiration, gratitude, and emotional truth can outlast everything, even time. If you've seen Up Close and Personal, watch it again. Look beyond the newsroom, the headlines, and the script. Look for the spark that still lingers between them. The one Michelle Pfeiffer just reminded us never truly faded. And tell us, what do you think her post meant? Was it love, respect, nostalgia, or something deeper? Comment below and share your take. Because this story, like so many in Hollywood, isn't really about answers. It's about the questions that linger long after the cameras stop rolling. Stay tuned. In our next video, we'll uncover more of these silent truths from Hollywood's golden past and explore the hidden moments behind the stars we thought we already knew.